So we know that's similar over in Western Australia, where 30 to 40% of young people in that youth justice system there have had diagnoses of FASD.
Wow.
So
30 to
the
40%.
cost, yeah. And, I think that's, I know that, we haven't done the proper prevalence studies that we need to do. It's not like you can prick your finger like we can with other illnesses and put it under the microscope and decide what it is. And for a number of instances, we can't always verify that prenatal alcohol exposure as well.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Frontline with Gary Payenda. That's me. I've got a little cold today, a little stuffy, so excuse the froggy voice, but I think we're going to have a really good show today. I'm speaking with Bear Hookway-Kopa, and he is a clinical psychologist who has spent a lot of time working in the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder field, and he's going to be talking with us today about the impact of alcohol on young people's lives and development, its impacts on criminality and performance in school, and its surprisingly high incidence in New Zealand. And also, the second half, we might talk a little bit about the political winds which are changing, which under this current government are making it a bit harder for us to rein in the alcohol industry. So yeah, this should be a interesting conversation. Bear, welcome.
Hookway, Gary, and thank you for inviting me along to share some of my experiences in that. Yeah.
Very happy to have you. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of your background? How would you describe yourself?
Oh, yeah. Look, I guess I'm quite a social justice advocate. So I've worked in health promotion, so in public health up here in Te Tai Tokerau for the last 18 years. So very much involved in addressing alcohol and other drug-related harm in particular. Had some previous public health experience working for the New Zealand AIDS Foundation during another pandemic that we seem to have largely forgotten about. And that's so, yeah, I've really spent much of my time in the advocacy space and more recently doing some Green Party policy development around the policies that affect us as individuals, like human rights and that.
Very cool. And would this be one of the groups you work with, Communities Against Alcohol Harm?
Yeah, sure. So I parted ways with Health New Zealand in April and was since approached by CAR to be their Northland community navigator. So that's just assisting our communities to express their opposition or concerns around liquor licenses as they come up in the Northland region, so Whanarei and the Far North.
We want to just spend a minute talking about that. I've had some limited exposures to how hard it is for communities to fight back against liquor stores, but it blew my mind. I think I read an article that you were quoted in where it mentioned that of 100 times that the community fights back and tries to prevent an alcohol shop moving or venue moving into its neighborhood, it loses that hearing process 99 times out of 100. Does that fit your experience?
I can understand that it's very frustrating for community to be able to oppose or to express their concerns about liquor shops, and we would sort of wonder if the changes in the law back in 2012 with the object of the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act was to give communities a say and to be able to address both the direct and indirect harm. And who's better to speak to that than our communities? But I think, I've been involved in this process right from the inception, really, when I was recruited into the Far North Alcohol team. So that was a collaborative initiative between Police Health and Far North District Council. And certainly looking at the premises that have come up for renewals and things, it's been very hard for community to get their concerns across the line. Very frustrating.
Right. And my understanding is that it's just getting harder. The Nicole McKee, that ex-gun lobbyist, is trying currently to pass laws that will make it harder, if not impossible, for community groups to have people come from outside of area to help them, which blows me away because government's not going to prevent $600 an hour lawyers representing the alcohol industry. Those people will still be allowed to come in, but the grassroots actual community organizers will not be able to get people to come in and help them. And of course, they depend on pro bono work done by lawyers volunteering their time, or social workers, emergency doctors like me coming to testify. It's wild. Like, this is the most pro corporate alcohol regime and government that I have seen in 18 years in New Zealand. It's really some scary times. So I will say this, Bear, I am very I have strong opinions and I am happy to express them. I understand that the people I interview may not be in a space to share or comment on those. So if I say something, you don't feel like you have to comment on it, because I know a lot of times people, there's been a pogrom against public health, healthcare workers, with, I think it might have been 25% of all public health positions being disestablished. We know that Simeon Brown and Shane Retty and uh, David Seymour have been attacking public health doctors and other professionals. I don't know if you want to comment on any of that. If you'd rather not, I'm totally fine with that. You just let me know if you do.
I'm happy to share my experience, and I feel fairly unshackled now from those constraints of being a public servant. So yeah.
Okay, can you comment on the attack on public health workers and public health in general in New Zealand under this coalition government? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's shameful, and it's disgusting, and it's very demoralising for the public health workforce. These sort of attacks aren't just unique to Aotearoa, New Zealand. I read a number of public health blogs from the States and around the world, but it's been particularly, I think, vicious here because public health is not really in a position to respond. And over the years, we've seen the arm's length organisations, which was ALAC originally around alcohol policy, and that who could criticise the governments, and that they were at arm's length. And then when the previous 3-term national government came into play, they restructured everything and pulled that back into the Health Promotion Agency under the minister's wing. And so that's what we see more and more of now. And we've had a number of journalists like Guy on Espana who have exposed some of the rather what some of us might think are unprofessional tactics, albeit a bit dubious, around kowtowing to the alcohol industry over the community voice. So I think that's very unfortunate that public health went from sort of hero to zero, hero during the COVID pandemic and the redeployment that our workforce experienced, and that whole stopping of our mahi, and then into the whole mis and disinformation, which it seems that these politicians have been buying into and perpetuating as well. So that's very much diminishing the trust in public health, which is quite a vital function, I think, of any health system.
It really makes you wonder what a government is even there for if it's not to protect the people. their health, their well-being, their education, etc. If really a government is just there to help pad the profits of the tobacco companies and the liquor companies and the rest, I'm sure it's incredibly profitable, and I know that it reaps big money for them in terms of corporate donations, but it just seems antithetical to everything that a democracy is supposed to be about. Quite sad. So, in that setting, you have been dealing with your interest, which is right now fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So, I'll pop this up on the screen, and I'd love it for you to explain to people what it is, because it touches on social work and education, um, the prison system, and the healthcare system. So please, can you describe it for us, what it is and how big it is?
Yeah, sure. Well, essentially, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or is actually disorders, is probably more correct. It's just a range of permanent conditions that can arise when the developing baby in utero is exposed to alcohol. So essentially, when mums drink alcohol during pregnancy, then that has that can have a lasting effect on developing child. So that could be when we look at the brain and the central nervous system. That's a part of the developing fetus that continues to develop all the way through the 9 months. And so that's why drinking alcohol at any stage of pregnancy can result in impairment and essentially a brain injury or a brain trauma to that developing fetus. If it's more at other stages of critical development around eyes and ears, so we find that around, and I always use a mild to wild terminology, Gary. I'm dumbing it down, but really that some are mild, some might be mildly impacted, and some might be quite severely impacted. And we've noticed that around those children, when we look at hearing and vision disorders, then that can be as much as 9 out of 10 children whose those disorders have occurred due to the alcohol exposure during pregnancy. So you can imagine, I always say to people, like, imagine someone that you know has had a car accident or a motorcycle accident and they've had a head injury. What were they like beforehand? And what were they like afterwards? And of course, everyone's affected differently. But the advantage that those people have is that they know what they were like beforehand, and you can judge what the impact has been. For these children, when they're born, we don't know what they would have been like without that exposure.
And are you seeing numbers as high as what this suggests? 1 in 10 far north kids affected by fetal alcohol? Is that an exaggeration, do you think?
No, there's been never any kickback around those figures. And to be honest, that I've talked to community staff at Māori NGOs and that, where they've reflected that maybe at their local marae, that maybe as many as half of the younger children have been affected. They see the hapu mama, the pregnant mums, drinking while they're pregnant, and then they see the kids coming through, and they see the same sorts of behavioural and cognitive challenges for those. So what we do know around Aotearoa is that areas of high deprivation in our rural communities, there is a higher incidence of drinking while pregnant, prenatal alcohol exposure, and therefore similar figures around the Hawke's Bay. So the clinicians down there have noted that, they think that it's definitely more than what the Ministry of Health touts as a sort of an average across Aotearoa of maybe 3 to 5 in 100.
I think one of the problems is that you can be drinking alcohol before you even recognize that you're pregnant. I looked up some numbers for this, and it says that 70 to 80% of New Zealanders will have had alcohol in the past year. Some of those are going to go on to find that they are pregnant, and alcohol is something that gets into every cell in the body. It's very permeable, and it can affect DNA. It causes oxidative damage. It gets metabolized to toxic chemicals that can impact both proteins and DNA. So yeah, there really is no safe level of drinking. Obviously, risk goes up with the more you drink, but it's not as if a small amount is good for you in any way conceivable.
No, and it's unfortunate, Gary, that there are mixed messages going out from our medical professionals still. I've been on this Hookway around promoting FASD awareness for 17 of the 18 years that I've been working up here. And earlier on, we'd hear quite a few stories, but they continued up until recent years where maybe a midwife had affirmed, oh, it's okay to have a glass of wine in your third trimester, or a doctor might say, the odd glass or two is okay. And I think, and of course you can Google whatever you want. And you might recall back in around 2013, there was a woman in Auckland who went to a restaurant and she was refused service. She was in her third trimester, and there was a lot of outcry over, well, it's her right to choose to drink. And there was other people speaking up, well, it's the rights of the unborn child to be protected. So certainly under the object of the act, the people who refused to serve her were following the law around reducing harm. But again, the debate came out, and we hear a lot more about that these days around personal rights over, community rights and our societal rights.
And there's just so much, as you said, misinformation out there. So I remember years ago, there was some studies on resveratrol, which is one of the substances in red wine, and it showed some health benefits in cell lines and animal models and very early science. And it was in doses that you'd never get drinking red wine on your own. And I assume it's just the influence of mainstream media trying to make money off of alcohol sales, because obviously liquor ads and whatnot has a huge influence on our sports, on our media. But it sent this message to everyone that a little bit of red wine is actually good for you, ignoring the fact that even very low amounts of alcohol increase your risk of, for example, cancers, from the mouth to the esophagus, breasts, all through your GI tract, liver, colon. And even once a week users have been shown to have increased rates of these cancers compared to non-drinkers. So I think mainstream media has a lot to apologize for by pushing this idea that something that's bad for you is actually good for you. And who can blame a lot of people for having heard that now for going on 20 years and think, well, I remember vaguely hearing something good about it, but the reality is the harm is immense to society. I'll pull up some of these other really impressive. So $9 billion.
While you're doing that, it's interesting you picked up on that red wine one, because that's one thing I've unpicked a lot of with some of my delivery of the training. Is the headline, the clickbait was glass of red wine a day equals going to the gym for an hour. And I unpacked that particular study, and the study was funded by the Israeli wine industry. The study didn't involve red wine. It was indeed resveratrol. The study did not involve human beings. It involved rats. It didn't involve the gymnasium. It involved just a running wheel. And so the whole extrapolation of the resveratrol being in the red wine to promoting red wine as a health tonic, and obviously the inference is if one glass is like going to the gym for an hour, then a whole bottle is like doing a week's workout in one drinking session. So the figures that you brought up now actually bear out the other costs of alcohol as actually not being a health tonic at all.
When I always say follow the money, and when you look at the dollar amounts that alcohol sales are bringing in, so overall revenues globally $3.6 trillion, nationally $7 billion in a year, come on. Like, to think that your little group of community advocates fighting to prevent damage to children can go up against people with revenues in the $7 billion a year range. It's almost impossible. And so we live in a world where something like an estimated 1 in 65 people is living with the end results of fetal alcohol. And so I just wanted to talk about the different areas that fetal alcohol affects: cognition, which would be like IQ; executive function, which is reasoning and consequences; adaptive skills, which are activities of daily living; emotional regulation, hyperactivity; and then some physical problems with kidneys and hearts and other things. But but the amount of damage that this causes is enormous. But you're never going to see that in like a Women's Day magazine or in a newspaper article or in a Facebook post. That doesn't sell a product. So it doesn't make it out there, which is a shame. It's honestly, the work you guys do is people like you do is extraordinary, because for every one of you, there's probably thousands of people in the industry actively, and government, frankly, actively working in favor of alcohol harm and alcohol profits. So, I mean, thanks. Thanks, Bear. But let's look at this in the green. I don't know if you can read it, but 9 billion in alcohol harm. 4.8 of that is fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Decreased quality of life and productivity, increased rates of intimate partner violence, child maltreatment, road crashes, on and on and on. Can you talk about, you actually take care of these people or deal with these folks on a very human to human basis? Can you tell us what fetal alcohol looks like in the stories that you live through?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is something I have really intimate experience with some of my godchildren and some of my whānau as well. So often people don't understand, because they think that there's that those affected are just being obstructive or naughty. I talk about the fact that in reality it's not that they won't, it's that they can't. So that's to recognize that there is a brain injury. And like with those people who I mentioned, if you've known them to have had a car accident or a motorcycle accident or something where there's been a head injury, you know that then they suffer from and they exhibit a number of challenges after that. That could be in how they emotionally respond. It might be in their decision making. It could be in their concentration. But all of those things become part of daily challenges. And so that's why we look at those that are affected, that maybe as many as 9 out of 10 have mental health issues throughout their life. And that's quite a big figure, as well as 7 or 8 out of 10 needing to rely on other people's support, daily support, to be able to navigate through life's challenges. And we often, more and often these days, I guess we see them as homeless people, as ram raiders. They make the headlines for reasons that we're actually not linking the dots back to why this has happened in the first place. And that also then tells you why that the solutions proposed by populist politicians are not the ones. Tough on crime is not going to get tough on brain injuries. That's ludicrous. And that's not the type of care that those people who are affected by that prenatal alcohol exposure need.
I was reading that if you have had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, you are 20 times more likely to be incarcerated in your life. You're vastly more likely to be a recipient of abuse and end up in care and ultimately end up in jail. 20 times more likely. So this is about reframing this to be a conversation about poverty, like endemic third world poverty, and a rampant and out of control alcohol industry that preys upon that, because we know that they make an outsized proportion of their profits from the most heavily addicted and highly using and abusing patients. So the last thing alcohol industry wants is to lose customers, and the all the damage for this is borne by society, as we see in the dollar amounts. How much does this sort of problem end up costing people in terms of social services or the government or individuals? Like, what is the financial toll that you've seen?
Well, I think that firstly, I'm going to dispel the myth that maybe like viewers have, that the government will not be acting on something because it's making too much money out of it. And it's not the government that's making the money. You've already framed the NZEIR report from last year done for Health New Zealand that estimates the cost at 9.1 billion a year. The government takes in on average about 1 billion in tax from alcohol. That's the total tax take across all of the taxes. So you're obviously, we're facing far more significant costs that are being borne across different governmental departments, different agencies and that. And as we see those supports being cut to our whānau, that the costs are increasingly being borne by families who just don't have the resources and the money. So when you talked about what sort of support are we giving them, I mean, this is around being able to be able to cope with strategies where every day is a new day. You with normal development for our children, they build on learning of mistakes and things. But what I've seen with my whānau and close friends has been, one who'll come to me and say, well, uncle, I don't seem to learn from my mistakes. And this is what now the youth court recognises. So there has been some progress over the years where the youth court underwent some training and went with our clinicians from Northland and Hawke's Bay and Auckland over to Canada. And so when I first started on this sort of hikoi around promoting awareness, we didn't have any capacity to respond to the challenges of this. So it was encouraging that the likes of Andrew Beecroft and the other who went on to be the Children's Commissioner were quite cognizant of being able to look at a young person's file and go, I think there's something else going on here, and try to change trajectory from that person not going into the penal system. So we know that's similar over in Western Australia, where 30 to 40% of young people in that youth justice system there have had diagnoses of FASD.
Wow.
So
30 to
the cost,
40%.
yeah. And, I think that's, I know that, we haven't done the proper prevalence studies that we need to do. It's not like you can prick your finger like we can with other illnesses and put it under the microscope and decide what it is. And for a number of instances, we can't always verify that prenatal alcohol exposure as well. So this is quite a difficult sort of topic.
If we're realistic about it, who is going to be lucky enough to get a clinical psychologist to do these neurocognitive assessments and to have good GP follow-up and to see specialist pediatricians about this and in communities that can barely afford to get in to see a GP, who don't have enough petrol money to come to a hospital even when their life might depend on it. I'm sure that it must be hard to get good numbers on this because we're probably underdiagnosing a lot of it.
And I think that's part of the challenge. I mean, but some of that will come up in schools. So one of the common traits around those affected in this way is the difference between their chronological age and their developmental age. And so, you've touched on some things in those statistics, maybe around inappropriate sexual behavior or something. And it's very hard that if you've got someone who's physically a teenager, late teenager, say 18, 19, 20, but in their mind and certain domains, their social, their other ones, they're maybe 6 or 8. then they're not going to have the normal cues that would say this is inappropriate to do this, or this is inappropriate for someone to be doing this to me. So these are some of the things that are along the way, the stories that I have had shared from often grandparents who are whāngaing their mokopuna, and say, look, we're glad that you mentioned this because we've had problems trying to understand why our mokopunas exhibiting these types of behaviours that are quite, to them, quite maybe bizarre or disturbing. And that, so there's a whole lot of challenges that come out of that. And of course, those sorts of things, if left unchecked, end up becoming part of the criminal justice system, and people end up being incarcerated for reasons that don't quite match their developmental chronological age profiles.
At a cost of, it says there, $125,000 a year per prisoner. So we are willing to spend enormous quantities of money on prisoners, but virtually nothing comparatively on healthcare, getting these folks food, medical, access to a GP, any of that, decent educations. It's just, wow, this is, I mean, I often feel like, in ED, we're dealing with the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but you're looking at the whole lifespan of it. You're seeing the damage over a life, to a lot of people. It's quite sobering, no pun intended.
You'd expect that the government would, devote some decent amount of resource to that. I mean, when we look at the alcohol levy and the NZEIR report was part of, I guess, Health New Zealand looking to frame advice to the ministry and back to the government over perhaps any increases in the alcohol levy. But, when we frame the harm at being 9.1 billion a year in Aotearoa, and yet we're not even collecting 20 million in a levy to address the harm, that's a pittance. And I look at the latest FASD action plan that's finally been released by the ministry, and it's very underwhelming given the significant nature of the challenge in front of us. This is something that is affecting most families, and we seem to be more open to working on things like breast cancer, which indeed does need awareness and things. But FASD, the hidden disability, it's not a sexy thing, as you say. You won't be reading it in Women's Day or something, and yet this is an essential part of public health, and public health is now getting gagged around what it can say and what we can do.
That's a good segue into this story from 20th of August. Ministry of Health forced to release documents showing alcohol lobby influence. What's disappointing to me is that with the current government, there's so much we're learning about only due to leaks to the media or OIA requests, which is where a journalist or an individual essentially goes through a very lengthy procedure and a slow procedure to try to get info released. And just time and time again, we've got things like this. The Ministry of Health essentially downplaying the influence of alcohol industry on them. Health Coalition Aotearoa said the industry should have no role in shaping alcohol policy. I mean, I think most reasonable people would say that government's alcohol policy and its health policy relating to alcohol and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder should have nothing to do with someone who profits from selling more alcohol. But the ministry's deputy director general, Andrew Old, defended its engagement, insisting companies had no special access. He said it's not a backdoor access. Yeah, it's a front door access. It's been a deliberate, structured approach with quarterly meetings with the team. Old did accept that the alcohol industry was motivated by profit. I would hope that they don't want to be doing harm. There's a clearly a conflict, but it's not, to my mind, an irreconcilable conflict that would mean that we should just never talk to them. This is corporate capture of government. plain and simple in my mind. Alcohol lobbyists were given the draft of an investment strategy on how to spend the alcohol levy. This is money that I think is like one penny, 1 cent on the sale of a can of beer that was supposed to be ring fenced for alcohol harm reduction measures. And this rotten government gave their draft investment strategy to the alcohol industry. You can't make this stuff up, to the lobbyists for their comment. And this article says that there was intense interest by the industry on this. And it's insane. Like this is not a government. This is a corporate lobbying firm in our government. They're even fighting. Well, it took a 20-year battle to get mandatory pregnancy warning labels on alcohol, with the industry saying you can't do it and it won't work. And then actually the specialists in alcohol harm reduction saying, no, the program actually reached 38% of women aged 18 to 30. And 70% of them got the key message: don't drink if you are or might be pregnant. Now, of course, the industry doesn't like that. Don't drink if you might be pregnant. That's going to be a lot of females that are going to buy less alcohol. That's the last thing that these people want to see. That'll affect their bottom line and their sales. I mean, what's your comment on that article?
I think that article was just one part of what has impeded the development of public health messaging around alcohol use. So we know back as there were public media articles that came out in 2018 where the Health Promotion Agency had said that they were due to get the revision of the New Zealand Safer Drinking Guidelines produced that year, 2018. That's another piece that Guyon Espiner has also exposed around how the ministry required Health New Zealand to remove the comments around the development of safer drinking guidelines. And, at a time when around the world in the UK, they've, their top medical people had noted that every standard drink causes an increase in the risk of cancer. So, you've got industry actively trying to contain and actually impede what public health should be promoting, which is an awareness around how we can be able to build people's health literacy and to counter those messages from the alcohol industry, which are indeed just around trying to sell products and to counter those messaging. There was, you might have followed last year when the industry had seen that there was going to be some work going on. So I think it was last year, maybe the year before now, and Professor Jenny Connor had done an opinion piece which the industry had gone to attack because they got alerted that maybe, look, there's going to be work that will potentially lower our drinking guidelines. And just to put in ridiculous, how that is at the moment, our drinking guidelines at the moment talk about 2 standard drinks a day for women. And yet a third of all alcohol-related breast cancers are caused from drinking 2 standard drinks a day or less. Now think of that, a third of all alcohol-related breast cancers. That's 200 mils of wine a day.
So this was a nice number I got from one of these studies. It's I can put a link up if anyone wants it. 1 drink per week. Now we're not talking 2 a day or 1 a day. 1 drink per week will increase your risk of a gastrointestinal tract cancer. So that's essentially mouth, throat, esophagus, all the way down to the other end in the colon. It'll increase your risk of a GI tract cancer by about 10%. That's 1 drink a week will increase your GI tract cancer risk by 10%. So, I am not one who says, we need prohibition or anything like that. But right now, the pendulum has swung so far on the side of the alcohol industry that it's just ridiculous. Some numbers on light drinking that I pulled out of these studies. Well, it's thought that alcohol is responsible for 4% of all cancers. Light drinkers, they saw a rise of oral cancers by 80%, of esophageal cancers by 30%, breast cancer 4%. So this is not without its harms. And yet you will rarely hear anything about it because, again, there's so much money to be had. So speaking of sort of a system that doesn't work at all, we've got a ex-gun lobbyist as the Associate Justice Minister, Nicole McKee, revealing a raft of alcohol law changes. Um, uh, yeah, and so it's some of that stuff we talked about, making it harder for communities to push back against um, alcohol company lawyers. And so, in my brief experience trying to argue these things at the hearings, you've got, like, perfect example. You've got a bunch of poor folks from the community that have in some cases taken some time away from work in order to go to the hearing, and then it might get moved or adjourned to a later day, and half of the people who would have testified can no longer. You've got a medical officer of public health who tries to go to these things to talk about the really negative health outcomes of having even more liquor stores in destitute communities selling more and more alcohol. And I understand the government has recently made it harder for these doctors to go do that, to testify in the community. They're so understaffed now due to the cuts and due to them being told by people like David Seymour and Simeon Brown to basically, what did he say? Like, get back in they're Muppets who should get back in their box. These are public health doctors doing their public health job, who our deputy PM called Muppets. So this is a rotten crew that we have, and I don't see these things getting better over time, but perhaps worse. Um, where do you think things need to go, and where do you see them going in the next couple of years?
Well, I think that there's been some hope that the appeals process for the Auckland local alcohol policy had run its course all the way up to our the top of our judiciary, that there is hope around the country that local alcohol policies would be enabled by local government, by different councils, and therefore the community voice would be reflected in those.
Yeah.
Albeit that then that the licensing committees don't have to follow what's set in those. And of course, we're dealing with changing the goalposts, as you say. Nicole's proposed to essentially roll back what the latest bits of the community participation bill, which is the bill that allowed anyone to rock on up to to oppose a liquor shop. I think the point I'd make about that, from my experience, is I worked across Taitokoro, for 18 years. I've heard from communities all across Northland, including Kaipara, Whangarei, and Far North. And so we've got a case coming up in Whangarei where they're wanting to reopen the nightlife after COVID. The late night drinking culture basically died off. Now we've got premises wanting to reopen to 3 a.m. Now, so I'm one of the objectors for that, but I live up here in the Bay of Islands, near Kirikiri. So under the new changes, I would be not able to go and participate and share from my experience.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So this is part of this cutting up people.
But the alcohol industry lawyers will be able to show up to these hearings. Like, this is oh my gosh, it's just so frustrating. It is just deeply disappointing that we are losing democracy in front of our eyes and enabling corporates to just dominate everything now, even our healthcare, even our public health. It's really disappointing. Yeah, I also see it getting worse in time because again, there's so much money that these folks have. And one thing again with my brief exposure to these local alcohol hearings, you might have no lawyer on the community side or maybe a volunteer pro bono lawyer who does it for free. More often than not, you won't have any. And on the other side, you're going to have a team of lawyers getting paid. So the other side is essentially taking time off work, precious time away from their family to fight against alcohol. And on the other side, you've got these vultures that are getting paid princely sums by an industry that can afford almost any amount of expenditure. Like it costs nothing for them to go from community to community to just get flown across the country to argue against regular folks. And so it was no surprise that the community loses 99 out of 100 of these battles. This is David versus Goliath, and David has nothing. He's been disarmed, and Goliath has been given a handgun. This is just the weaponization of public health to harm people for profit. It's awful. It's awful. And then you've got
And
this
the thing
guy
is,
up on the screen. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
they're just doing this without any consultation with community. And I'm looking at the couple of hearings that I've got coming up where I've objected personally to some licenses, and even with the community participation bill enabling, so taking out the grilling of our community members, by other lawyers,
Right.
and that.
Right.
You've still got to prepare your brief of evidence. And, there are some people that are not so great at being able to put stuff on paper and that. And so, but you're still in this process of submit your brief of evidence. And then, the applicants will be able to, their lawyers and what have you, be able to work through that. And then you're going to get along. And so it's really not just hearing for some of our community, it's an oral history. It's an oral submission to speak to their experiences and their whānau's experiences. So it's very weighted against our community objectives in the first place. And if it, that's where CAR has had a role nationally, well, originally in Auckland, Waikato, and Christchurch is around, and now to be able to extend that, to be able to give some support, because it's just not happening. Police and health, you're quite right, have stepped back, and where we would expect those agencies to be able to speak to the evidence, that's not happening. And
part of that, being told not to. I mean, I get private messages from public health doctors and doctors in training who are just frightened over speaking out because they feel they just cannot, because they know that they will be put in the crosshairs. They'll become a target, and they may be defunded or attacked publicly, as David Seymour has done in the past. This is it's dark days for public health in Aotearoa right now. And this is, I guess, the latest thing I've seen. Regulation Minister David Seymour won't rule out label changes for nicotine, tobacco, and alcohol. And in the old days, when you saw labeling changes, you would think better labeling, like more cautions about this, more information about how it can harm your baby or harm you or cause cancer. No, we're talking about removing labeling, deviating from international standards shared with Australia on harmful product labeling, and essentially putting the consumer on the back foot through all of this with less labeling. And of course, we know that they undid the best anti-smoking laws probably in the world, the smoke-free changes, and they under urgency in the dead of night, they got this thing through and demolished our ability to fight tobacco in New Zealand. So it's these are the darkest times I have lived through from a public health point of view in New Zealand. And like I'm in ED. I can't imagine actually being in a public health setting. This is what this lobbying agency, New Zealand Initiative, they call themselves a think tank, but they're just corporate lobbyists. This is their article on a crate day for New Zealand, because, you know, this guy jokingly, and this is, he's like the master of chaos here, jokingly proposed that it turn into a state holiday, crate day. And here, these guys, this junk tank, said it's time for New Zealand to formally recognize the cultural phenomenon that best captures our national spirit, crate day. It represents the best of our nation. It involves the sophisticated activity of consuming an entire crate of your local beer while engaging in classic Kiwiana activities. And they say, yeah, there might be downsides of injuries, but that's what ACC is there for. And then this, it shows you what Crate Day, which was sold by the radio companies, which again are corporate-owned media. They tried to trademark it several times. And here we go. We've got alcohol-related admissions to Waikato emergency departments doubling for patients 20 to 34 over Crate Day weekends compared to standard weekends. This is giving the profits to the corporations, and the taxpayer is left with all of the costs, all of the harms, and it's deeply unjust. How are we going to change this, Bear? How are we going to change this?
Well, I suggest the most easy way is to vote this government out at the next, at the first available opportunity. But then, of course, we're looking for some sound evidence-based policies, which I believe we had. And as a country, we were heading in the right direction, I think, with the sorts of policies. But we have a long way to go. The link between alcohol and cancer is not well known. We've had research to show that. So, it's good that you've been able to update the viewers and that around some of those statistics. Of course, we've known that alcohol is a class 1 carcinogen since the 80s, when the World Health Organization recognized it. So it's the same toxicity as benzene and asbestos and things. So things that we'd really like to avoid. So it is our most favorite drug. So it's really a lot of that countering it. So the previous 3-term national government, there was a report at the Ministerial Forum on advertising alcohol and sponsorship, which we thought was a bit of a patsy thing, with Sir Graham Lowe leading it. Came back with really strong recommendations around eliminating or cutting back on the advertising sponsorship, creating a similar fund to the smoke-free fund that was created to replace commercial sponsors. So you'd no longer have the Lion Red Rugby Cup or these ones associated, and they would become sort of around alcohol-free and that. So there's stuff that needs to be tackling the marketing and the promotion. And we need to look at the availability and the accessibility. So that's the hours in which alcohol is sold. So I've talked to you about, like Whanarei looking to want to reopen up again to 3 a.m. When I first started in public health up here with that tri-agency approach, we had the 3 worst premises in Aotearoa in the police alcohol-linked data. So Kaikoi Hotel, Kiri Kiri Homestead Bar and Restaurant, and the Lighthouse Tavern over in Paihia. And when the Whanau District Council changed the licensing hours from 3 a.m. closure to 1 a.m., the alcohol-related violence in that period dropped by 80%.
Oh,
quite a significant little case study to show why nothing good happens after midnight where alcohol is concerned. And yet we don't hear anything from the agencies around challenging these sorts of areas of creep around times. So I think the public in general, from the surveys that I've read, and no doubt you've had a look at online as well, show that generally people don't want places to be open as early, and they don't want places to be open as late. That they think that there's, to define the period when alcohol can be sold. And in certain instances, the location of our alcohol shops, which which I put it to you that if the cannabis legalization bill had gone through, would we be debating the same issues about where a cannabis shop would be to alcohol, and yet alcohol causes the most harm? So I think
even methamphetamine. There's so much news about the hazard that is methamphetamine, which is absolutely true, but people have no idea that alcohol dwarfs all other drugs of abuse, even meth, by like an order of magnitude in terms of its harm to the community, in terms of its cost to the community. There's nothing that has as far-reaching negative impact on us as our rampant and out of control situation with alcohol here.
I know that was a frustration when I first started. I went to a hui in Auckland where there was an alcohol health watch one actually, and they were starting to develop their own Auckland action on alcohol plan. So it's going back like 17 years. And I remember one of the speakers saying at that stage that really the Ministry of Health needed to be able to collect the data on alcohol-related harm. And so you'll know that our ED in Whanarei and ED in Hookway-Kopa and Kaitaia were part of an initial project around being able to collect that data, but also to acknowledge that the other tasks in ED are huge, and the understaffing and just having to be able to take time to be able to do alcohol screening and collect that data. So what we've seen under a successive range of governments is that we haven't bothered to put that evidence. So you'll experience that, that you deal with the people coming in, you can probably smell the alcohol, you can see their intoxication,
Sure.
see the harm that they've come to, but we're not documenting it. And I think that's really essential.
7% of all ED visits in New Zealand are alcohol related, at a cost of $55 million a year, plus another $46 million a year for the ambulance, and it involves 16% of all injuries we see in ED. So the cost is insane.
And this is at a time that we want every last dollar to be going into health, and we're seeing all these other cuts in favour of landlords and tobacco companies and what have you, and big holes in an underfunded system that, as you say, really is part of what by cutting the resources, part of the intention to privatise as many of the services that they can, and that's not going to result in good public health. We've always seen this trend from the corporates, that the corporates want to be the good hosts, so they develop their little websites and their harm reduction measures, which never tell you the sort of thing that if you think you might be pregnant, don't drink. That's not a message, as you say, they're going to tout, because then they'll do away with some people drinking. But I got to point this out at a little bit of project that we've been doing up here as a pilot in the far north. So I presented to 9 different sessions of alcohol licenses in conjunction with the Far North District Council, and that was just to promote an alcohol pregnancy warning sign to be displayed in licensed premises. So we know it's got to be on the products, and this is a voluntary thing. There was a petition before Parliament at the moment that the Select Committee was hearing submissions on. Because that's a bit that's missing, is around premises just being able to support that. But there are other ways that they could do that. Like they could have, promoting non-alcoholic drinks to hapu mamas on their menus and things. There was a lot of support from that from the licensees, and so I detect a difference, and I've worked with licensees for a number of years, between them and the industry that is forcing them to sell a whole lot of products. And as one business said, why do we get so many of these different flavors and different drinks through, which they're expected to promote, and yet those products, those RTDs, are particularly what's attractive to our younger women, who are more likely to be have an unplanned pregnancy. So we talked about that at the beginning of the session, around maybe 70-80% of pregnancies are alcohol exposed. And therein is the problem, is that if you are planning to become pregnant, well, then you would be able to stop doing that. And that's some of my whānau at the moment. They've taken on that decision and haven't had alcohol for 3 months. Kia ora, that's great. But for the others who are regularly involved in regular drinking and perhaps heavy drinking, then they're more likely to have a pregnancy that is alcohol exposed.
Right. I mean, it's quite similar to what you see with vaping. If you there have been studies that map this out. You look at where the vape shops have chosen to be located, and it's no surprise. I mean, you put them near schools, because if you can hook these kids early enough, you've got a customer for life. And we've dropped the ball so thoroughly, and it's because we've got people in charge that are beholden to corporations. That's the bottom line, is just follow the money. Follow the money. Tell me, just in the last 60 seconds or so that we have, can you just tell me about what your work with the Green Party has been? What are you working on in terms of alcohol prevention stuff with the political parties?
Probably with the Green Party, I was more involved with the latest. So the Green Party's finished all the policy development, so a year ahead of potentially the next election. So everything's already available, unlike other parties that don't want to tout that. Essentially, though, I think the core part of that we've been working on was around the human rights policy, to look at what are basic rights around food and income and housing, and looking things that are critical at the moment, issues that are faced by our communities across New Zealand. And you see that those there's a government that says this is individual rights about this, but they're ignoring actually our communities' rights to have basic standards of living and that. So I think the Green Party is definitely in favour of law change to enable the issues that we've touched on in this interview around reducing alcohol-related harm. And, it will be good if we can actually get more support from the other parties too to do that. So again, election time is around vote for change.
I think regardless of what party gets in too, there's really got to be a nationwide reversal of the influence of corporate money on government. We need to have publicly funded campaign finance reform. We need to have complete and utter transparency. Every time these lobbyists do their work, it should be in the open. It should be televised. And we shouldn't have to be discovering all of this stuff by OIA requests to find out what secret thing was done in a back room. It's just so anti-democratic. It really does feel like we are actively losing our democracy under the current coalition. I cannot wait till it ends. Regardless of who gets in afterwards, there can be no more of a corporate lobbyist government than what we've had for the past 2 years. It's just depressing. If you have any interest in public health, you would just be decrying what's going on. I'll plug some of my own writing. I've got a Substack that people can view. I put on articles on there. I try to take things like we've talked about and give the citations to all of it and put that up. So if people want the data behind anything I've said, they're likely to find it on there. Tell me, where can people learn more about what you do? Do you want to plug any of the organizations that you work with in terms of donations? How do people support this? How do people help you do what you do?
Yeah, it's a good point, but a car doesn't sort of really operate on donations. Car has it is a charity, and of course we relied on some of the grants that we're able to get from, say, J.R. Mackenzie Trust and the like. I think what I'd like to encourage people to do is to be aware of that. And I think that's what doesn't happen, is they're not aware of these opportunities to speak out. So part of our role with CAR and that is to be able to spread the word. Hey, look, so locally here we had a liquor shop wanted to open on the petrol station forecourt. It's like, raise the social media awareness of this. Do you want to see another liquor shop? Everyone's like, no, we've got enough. So it's really trying to promote awareness in an environment that's so cluttered with so much stuff in social media at the moment. It's a very difficult challenge to cut through, and I think that's the hardest
It is hard to talk to people who, like, I work with a lot of nurses who are wonderful people, and they're engaged and interested, but they're getting fatigue from writing submissions on all of these, David Seymour Act-based bills. Every week, seemingly, there's another outrage, whether it's women's pay equity or, the smoke-free stuff or any of it. And you do get to the point where you say, like, what more can I do? Are these submissions doing anything, or is all this stuff just being railroaded in? It's hard. It's hard. There is no simple answer for people. But okay, I think one thing anyone can do is spread messages like this within their social circles. So if you've got an article you've read about Bear's anti fetal alcohol work, share it. Share it widely, put it up on your social media, put it on your Facebook or whatever. And the same goes for the frontline stuff. If you can share this with even just one friend, the only alternative to an industry that has literally billions of dollars behind it is going to be millions of people actively fighting against it in the community. So that's the only thing that's going to move the dial on this one. You've got to make these politicians afraid that they're going to lose their positions and their jobs, and that this stuff will be widely known. So yeah, hopefully everyone who watches can spread this. It's been a long interview, but a great one. I thank you, Bear, for being with me. And I applaud you on the work you do. I think it's amazing, and I hope you can keep it up.
Well, I applaud what you're doing too, Gary. I think that people need to have trust in our medical professionals, and to have people that are unmuzzled and actually able to share the truth out there, I think is vital for that confidence to be restored. So thank you, and the others like you.
You're welcome. I don't know how long it will keep up, because you talked about muzzling. These are dark days for doctors who want to speak up on behalf of patients. I don't kid when I say democracy is diminishing by the month. Thank you for coming on the show, and hope to have you back in the future on another topic or on a progression of this topic. Thanks, Bear. All right, viewers, thanks for joining me and Bear today. And please listen to what we were talking about, share it with some friends, get the knowledge of what's happening out there, and it's our only hope for fighting this off and making a better society. See you next time.